We initially started this project in 2012. The large mammal monitoring is a part of a much larger project looking at the responses of wildlife as well as vegetation in general to these forest restoration treatments up in the Jemez Mountains in northern New Mexico. This project stemmed from the Cerro Grande fire that burned down parts of Los Alamos. So as a result of that, Congress started the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program. Part of that program requires that they monitor the responses of wildlife. So there are people that are involved in the larger project that are looking at fisheries, they're looking at birds, they're looking at invertebrate responses as well as vegetation. The part that we're focusing on is looking at how the vegetation responds to these sorts of treatments, to the thinning and then the prescribed burns, and then how the herbivores respond to that change in vegetation. Overall, it's really a large collaborative project. So it involves the U.S. Forest Service and the Park Service, as well as New Mexico State University, the U.S. Geological Survey, the New Mexico Cooperative Fish and Wildlife Research Unit. New Mexico Department of Game and Fish is heavily involved in the project, as well as Texas Tech University and New Mexico Highlands University. Our project primarily involves mule deer, elk, and black bears. So what we're doing in addition to the vegetation monitoring work that we do, we've got GPS collars fitted on all of these animals. And basically they record where they're at regular intervals. They're doing a couple different landscape scale treatments. This one behind me is a thin that was occurred about 3 years ago. So they came in and they thinned the trees out to try to get a density that was more representative of the historic forest structure, one that would be more resilient to wildfires. A lot of our forests in New Mexico, particularly ponderosa pine forests, are really prone to wildfires, primarily due to decades of fire suppression, overgrazing, and logging have resulted in an increased density and smaller diameters of the trees in the forests. And so when they do catch on fire, it more likely gets into the crown and then carries across the landscape, resulting in a stand replacing fire. Whereas historically, when you had a more open understory and a more open canopy like we have behind us here, you tended to get wildfires, and when they did occur, they tended to stay on the ground. And of course that resulted in more beneficial conditions for wildlife, and it also helped maintain these open forest stand structures by removing some of the saplings and not allowing the forest to become too dense like they are in a lot of areas in New Mexico. When we initially started this project, we were basically focusing on assessing the responses of these large mammals to landscape scale prescribed burns as well as landscape scale thinning projects. Shortly after starting the project, we had the Las Conchas wildfire, and then 2 years later we had the Thompson Ridge wildfire. So we've kind of incorporated those kind of as unplanned treatments into our research here. So far what we found is that the elk are really responding to the wildfire burned areas. So they're really utilizing those heavily. And those wildfire burned areas, our forage plots that we have in there, have 4 to 5 times the amount of forage biomass for elk than the untreated areas. The mule deer aren't really using the wildfire areas so much, but they are using the prescribed burned areas, particularly within 1 to 2 years after the prescribed burn is put through the forest. In terms of the forest thinning areas, they're really not using the forest thins that extensively until they're at least 5 years old. You're starting to see some of the shrub cover come back, and that's really what the mule deer are responding to, because their diet's composed primarily of browse, whereas elk, their diet's composed mostly of grasses. So once this shrub component comes back, we would start to expect to see more mule deer using these areas, like we have with some of the older thinned plots we have on another part of the forest here.
Eye on Research is a production of New Mexico State University.